So, Dr. Alana Berg, thank you so much for coming in on a Sunday.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. You came to Kelowna in 2006.
Yes.
What made you decide to come here in 2006?
Well, ironically, not the reasons that most people come to Kelowna. I had actually only been to Kelowna probably once, maybe twice when I was a child. I was from Alberta originally. So I didn't really know the climate or, how beautiful it was. I actually came to join a clinic. So I looked at leasing or renting a space out of a holistic clinic. It was a herbalist downtown Kelowna. So I came and I just had a really good feeling about Kelowna. And I didn't do all the things that you do when you start a business, like market research. I just said, you know what? I feel like I'm supposed to be here. So that was 12 years ago.
Wow.
Crazy. And now I get to see how beautiful it is and how lucky I am.
So when you graduated from school, were you open to any place in Canada that had a clinic?
I kind of was. I had grown up in Alberta. I went to university at U of A in Edmonton. And so when I went to school, I was in Toronto in Ontario. And I just really felt like I was a Western girl. So I knew I kind of wanted to come to Western Canada, but I didn't really know where. I initially went back to Alberta, and I just felt like I really wanted to jump the Rockies and come to BC. Again, didn't know it would be Kelowna at the time. I looked at the Lower Mainland, but just kind of fell in love with this area, and super happy I did.
Did you visit other areas before you made your decision, or
I did.
was this the first place?
I did. I actually I almost moved to Vancouver. So there was a clinic there that I was looking at creating with a colleague of mine. I even had a place to rent. I was pretty sure that's where I was going to be. And then I had taken some time off between graduating and starting practice, where my now husband was working in Vietnam. So I kind of left it at that point. And when I came back, thinking I was going to move to Vancouver, it just didn't quite work out. So then I decided, gee, where am I going to go? Almost stayed in Vietnam, and then decided, no, I love what I do, and I was ready to start my profession, and I wanted to create something, and so I just felt like Kelowna was a great opportunity.
Sure. Do you ever sometimes wish you tried Vancouver?
No.
Instead?
I'd like to visit, but it's way too busy.
Yeah, I feel the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great city. I love visiting and attending hockey game or theater or whatever, but I vastly prefer living here.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
So you graduated from the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine in 2005. Where is that located?
That's in Toronto.
In Toronto.
So it's a 4-year program. It's a medical school, but it's a naturopathic medical school. So it's just like any physician after university, you have to go to postgraduate in medicine, and so it's a specific school to train naturopathic physicians.
Right.
And so at the time that I went, there was only one accredited school in Canada. And the American dollar was quite different, kind of maybe similar to what it is now. So it would have been quite a bit more expensive to go in the U.S. And at the time, there was 4 schools in the U.S. And to be accredited in North America, you have to go to an accredited school.
Right.
So there is now a school in New Westminster, but it wasn't approved nationally. It was only approved in BC, and at the time I didn't know this is where I was going to end up. So I wanted to make sure I left my doors open and went to the school that had the background and I felt had more opportunity.
Right. So the accreditation, is that how you say it?
Yeah.
So the accreditation, it's the equivalent of any type of medical doctor.
It's a different type of, we're under the Healthcare Practitioners Act, so it's a different type of, we're not medical doctors, we're naturopathic doctors.
Okay.
So we don't go to a medical school in the conventional realm, we go to medical school in the naturopathic realm. Okay. So a lot of our prerequisites are the same, and in terms of the training, especially initially, anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, it's very much the same. What makes us different is our approach, therefore our treatments. So a lot of times people think of naturopathic medicine as maybe natural or alternative probably wouldn't be actually the words I'd use. I'd maybe say more traditional or maybe innovative, because actually a lot of the therapies we use are where the current medical research is but hasn't become mainstream. So it's not so much necessarily what therapies we're doing, but more so why we're doing them. So it's always about getting to that root cause, finding out why things are happening. So the training and the philosophy is different, therefore the tools are different.
You have to do an internship at the end?
Yeah, our fourth year is all clinical. So it's 12 months and we don't work in hospital settings, so it's not in the same way that you do an internship as a medical doctor, but it is all clinical care. So we're working in a clinic, seeing patients.
Right. Tell us some of the key philosophical differences between traditional medicine. You said it's not really traditional because if you go back in time far enough, what you're doing today is what people have done for centuries.
Yes.
Right? But what are some of the key differences philosophically between what people consider traditional medicine, like hospitals and medical doctors, versus what you're trying to do?
So what I call is the conventional model of what most of us are used to has really been around for about maybe 100 years in terms of medications have only been around really since wartime. The development of antibiotics and morphine definitely was really important in World War II. But out of that came kind of a different model where it was very much focused on acute care medicine is kind of how I refer to it. So sometimes, and there's definitely a need, and we've made great advancements where, at one point in history, if you had an accident or an injury or, for example, a really difficult childbirth, often that would be life-threatening. Never mind the actual injury, but then resulting infection. So we've made leaps and bounds in being able to really prevent acute death and injury in conventional medicine. I think part of where that philosophy is a bit different is from my perspective, it's not just about understanding what we need to do to maybe address symptoms. So that's where treatments come in. People talk about medications or surgeries where we're treating a symptom that's coming up. So, for example, if you have heart disease or high blood pressure, you take a blood pressure medication, right?
Yes.
So to control that blood pressure so that we're managing the symptom. But my approach would be looking at it and saying, well, why do you have high blood pressure? And looking at that on a deeper perspective and trying to understand, is it your diet, your lifestyle? Is there toxins in the system? What do we need to be addressing so that you don't require that heart medication? So it's not that there isn't a time and a place for both things, but where and how we're looking at it is quite differently. So they're kind of looking at what is going on and recognizing the diagnosis, trying to create an understanding of what's going on in the body, or I'm taking kind of that step further and trying to understand, well, why is this happening? And not only can we prevent it from getting worse, but is there other things that we need to be doing to actually rectify and get to the root of what's going on?
Right. Would that apply to mental health as well?
Yeah, health, no matter what a person's coming in with, our approach is still the same. So again, it's recognizing that there's a necessity often to address what's going on. So if it's, a major depressive episode or something where a person is really in a state where they need medication and significant support, that's critical for them in that space. But it's also saying, well, then what can we understand more about why that's happening? So it's counseling. Is there nutritional factors that we could be using to help support their brain chemistry, for example? We know there's a huge gut-brain connection. So a lot of our neurotransmitters are actually created in the stomach. So is there digestive issues? So it's looking at the bigger picture, but also recognizing, we have to address the symptoms too. We don't ignore symptoms. We just address them differently.
Right. So you've got a lot of certifications. I'd like to go through some of these so you can educate us on what they are. So what is chelation?
Chelation is the removal of heavy metals from the body.
Okay.
So it's exactly that, very simple. It's basically you're taking an agent, a chemical agent. So it's typically like a medication. So it's something that was created back in the 20s. EDTA is one of them. It's most commonly used. And we actually use it as a preservative in food. But the therapy is designed to remove things like lead, mercury, aluminum, cadmium, these big metals that have no business in the body and they don't benefit us and they can cause damage and harm. and they've been linked to all sorts of chronic diseases. So these are diseases that happen over time.
Yeah.
And the hard part about heavy metals is we're kind of the big fish of the sea, so that we bioaccumulate them through our lifespan, through all our different exposures, and we have a really hard time getting rid of them. So the treatment of chelation is to assist your body to remove those metals so that they're not causing damage.
So, for example, if fish are absorbing this and we eat seafood, then it attaches to our organs and it creates all kinds of problems.
We absorb it, yeah. And so typically we will tend to stuff heavy metals in our fat and our bone tissue, but over time we kind of run out of space, so that's where often we'll see more health issues later in life. So linked to Alzheimer's, dementia, MS, Parkinson's, because at that point you're getting to see a lot more, especially neurological damage is a common one that comes up with heavy metals, heart disease, kidney disease, immune system, because bone marrow is very close if you're stuffing it in the bones. So it's just assisting the body to clear it. Fortunately, when you're consuming it in, like through fish or through your food, we do have some filtration. We won't necessarily absorb it all. Where we may not get as much filtration as if it's something like there's mercury for a long time, not as much anymore, but there's still aluminum in things like vaccines. Amalgams has been a common one in your teeth.
Right. The old metal fillings.
That's right.
Yeah.
Which you could swallowing, but also maybe absorbing through your tissues. So it's when you're getting them more in those exposures, we don't have as many defenses than necessarily if we ingest it.
So how does chelation work? How do you get those heavy metals out of the body?
Yeah, it's usually done either through a pill form or an IV. So it depends on which agent you're using, which is specific for a particular heavy metal. So usually what I will do is I'll test the patient first and find out what load they have in the system, and then we'll determine what protocol we'll do. Sometimes,
is that like a blood test or a urine test?
It's a urine test.
Urine test. And you can tell.
Yes. So we do what we call an unprovocated test, where you just kind of do a random urine test. So we're just seeing, is there anything in your environment right now you might be exposed to? And then we do what's called a provocation test, where I kind of challenge the system with a chelating agent and see if anything comes out. So it's kind of giving our best estimate of what the body load is. Because otherwise, it's stuffed away. Your body's not really releasing it. So we have to challenge the body to see if we can get anything to come out. And it tells us whether or not there's some things that we need to address.
So maybe tell us about IV therapy next. So you said IV therapy is one way to treat this.
Yes.
How does IV therapy work?
So IV therapy is the intravascular or intravenous administration of nutrients. So chelation is one type of intravenous therapy, but we also do things like high-dose vitamin C, or sometimes kind of like a multivitamin, in the sense it's going to have some minerals, different vitamins, usually always water-soluble vitamins, not fat-soluble vitamins.
What's the difference between those two?
So water-soluble literally means that nutrient dissolves in water.
Yeah.
So those are things like vitamin C and your B vitamins. Fat-soluble with things like vitamin D, vitamin A. So you can't put it into a form that's in an IV drip if it's in a fat form, right?
Okay. That's something you need to eat or take through the sun.
Yes. Vitamin D, yes, we, especially in North America, we always want to make sure we're having some in the winter, because we don't get a high enough UV index to actually make our vitamin D.
Right.
So that's why often we'll find Northern Hemisphere countries are often quite low in vitamin D. But yes, we can't administer that through an IV. It has to be ingested. Now, if it's fat soluble, that also means that we accumulate it in the body. So you take a small amount, and you will steadily support that amount in the system. But where water soluble, you can flush it out quite easily. So if you had a high dose vitamin C, for example, you'll absorb a bunch of what you need, and whatever you don't need, the body will flush.
Right. So what other IP treatments are available, and some of the benefits?
Yeah. Well, I've used them for all sorts of things. They can be used in sports, so recovery from maybe an event or some sort of training that they're doing. I've used it for just general immune boosting, especially in this kind of spring and fall, cold and flu season. I've used them for assisting with detox. I've used them for cancer. I treat a lot of autoimmune and Lyme disease, so sometimes it's really to just build up the immune system. So there's lots of different, I have a few different formulas that we'll use, so it really depends on the condition. Oxidative therapy is another one you're probably going to mention, but that also can be done through IVs. Things like ozone, hydrogen peroxide, which actually helps clear infections. So that's a common one we use for.
So you can actually inject hydrogen peroxide.
It's an IV drip, a very low dose.
Right.
Yes. Not injected, no.
Right.
But yes, and same with ozone. We actually take blood out of the body, we ozonate it, and then we drip it back in. So it's actually just your blood, but it's been oxygenized. That's what ozone does. Is it?
Interesting.
It basically makes a nice red oxygenated blood, and so it's very energizing, but it also helps clear infections.
So that could help someone suffering from fatigue or severe jet lag, things like that.
Yeah. Anything where the body, when we look at poor oxygenation, that can be literally because we're not breathing properly, we're not getting enough oxygen exchange, and that could be a lung issue that we have. Or it could be a disease process where we're not actually able to, maybe we're using it up or we're not transporting it very well. So if our cells don't have energy, how can they heal?
Right.
So the whole idea is helping your body to produce the energy so it can do the metabolic functions it needs to do.
Yes. Where does the drip go? Is it in the wrist or the arm?
Usually the arm.
Is it painful?
No.
No. Okay.
I'm gentle.
Well, I have to ask because I know many people are a little bit squeamish about needles, so we have to ask.
I mean, I'm not going to say that you don't feel it at all. It is it's an IV, but it's actually a smaller needle than you do if you were getting a blood draw. It's a smaller needle. And it's, pretty quick, and you do have to sit with it in it, but we usually use catheters, which means there's no needle left. It's just a little tube that's in the vein.
Right. And you can read a book or
you can read a book
have a
or
chat.
Exactly. People usually have a lot of fun in the little room talking together. So
right.
Yeah.
How many patients can you treat at the same time?
For IVs, I have 3 IV chairs, so I will often have 3 dripping at one time, depending on the day.
A lot of conversation about, so what are you in for? And
they can certainly do that. They can keep to their own too. They don't have to.
Right.
But yeah, I think people get a lot of camaraderie around their healing process and obviously why they're there. So I think people have actually made great connections that way too and support.
Sure. What is pharmacology?
So that's basically the ability to prescribe pharmaceuticals. So prescriptive authority is something that naturopaths in BC exclusively have in Canada, and it's been probably the last, I think, 5 years. So basically, we're trained in it in school, but it depends on the province which professionals are able to prescribe. So basically in BC, we've had that authority. So it means that I can prescribe an antidepressant or a thyroid medication, or I do a lot of women's health, so it might be a bioidentical hormone. So it just gives the access to medications. It's not because that's our primary focus, but it's a tool. Like anything, it's a tool. So it's great because a lot of times, I might suggest a certain medication previously when I was practicing before we had that prescriptive authority, but I wouldn't be able to, I'd have to send them back to their GP to get that prescription. So it just allows us to be able to work together and be able to be more of that primary care physician, which we've been trained to be. And I don't, I always encourage my patients to talk to their medical doctors about coming, and that we're meant to, I want to be collaborating. I don't want to be going against anything that they're saying.
Right.
So I'm always very respectful on how that looks, and if there's any changes, why we're making changes, and having that conversation. But it allows us to be able to be on that place where we're understanding why they're doing what they're doing, and again, being able to maybe make suggestions because we have that background and understanding.
Well, it's fairly recent in Canada and North America that natural medicine has got the respect that it deserves legally in the medical profession. Do you ever find you still get some pushback from conventional medical doctors, and they say, they disagree with you?
I think there's a lot of misunderstanding and misrepresentation. I think that the old theory around naturopaths is kind of I use the analogy because people say it to me, the kind of witch doctor or, granola tree hugging or it's just kind of funny because if you ever met me, I'm not like that at all.
Right.
But it's, I think it's just been a misconception around and misunderstanding of what our background is, what our training is, how long we've had to go to school to do what we do, that we are a qualified physician. It's just that we're approaching things differently. And so I think in BC, our college has worked really hard to make sure that we are all regulated and under the authority and jurisdiction of them, and making sure that we're all up to par on how we're trained and what we're doing, which is, again, an exception in BC. We actually have a regulatory college, not just an association,
right.
which does put a lot more authority and power over naturopaths and how they're trained.
Right.
So I think with that also brings recognition, because physicians are saying, well, yeah, then they have to be doing things properly because somebody's watching them.
Right.
So I think that's helped, but definitely it's like anything. When a person doesn't understand something or information, they'll either say, hey, I don't understand it, it might work, or they'll say, there's no way I don't understand everything about this, so it can't be right. And
right.
I think it's just personality.
Yes. It takes time sometimes.
Yes.
So you mentioned bioidentical hormones. I see a doctor in town for that. So tell us a little bit about that. What is bioidentical hormone therapy?
So bioidentical hormones is basically human identical hormones. So they are synthetically made. Everybody asks me that question. Are these coming from humans? No, we make them. Or I don't make them, but they're made in a pharmacy. But they are identical to what your body already knows. So the difference is, historically, or in the last several decades, in the 80s and 90s, they were using a lot of synthetic hormones that was made from Premarin, was like a pregnant mare's urine. So that's why they called it Premarin. Was a hormone, or it acted like a hormone in the body, but it was a foreign chemical. So it had a lot of unanticipated effects in the body, which is why they had a big study in the end of the 90s. They called it the nurses study. They actually had to stop it because they had so many negative effects with HRT, which is not bioidentical hormones. Again, it was the synthetic version of causing things like breast cancer. So they got a lot of negative press around HRT, or hormone replacement therapy. But again, that was because it was using a foreign chemical. Now, if we're using what the body already recognizes and already knows how to do, then we're just looking at physiology instead of looking at a study and saying, how is this drug, how is this foreign chemical acting in the body? We already know how it's acting in the body.
Right. So
it's really then just about understanding, for example, when a woman goes through menopause, what levels they need to be supporting, because there's estrogen, there's progesterone, there's testosterone. Every woman's different. And so just because hormones are changing, that's the commonality. We all know that that's changing at that time of life. It doesn't mean it's always the same.
Right.
So it requires a really individualized approach. And the long term of the benefit, I always tell my patients I'm kind of a conservative prescriber, and that I'm always looking for the least effective dose, because if your body doesn't need that much, why would we want to put that much? It's still a hormone, right? So there's still effects of having too much hormone in the body. So I'm always looking to see how can we allow a person to go through that transition period gracefully.
Right.
So, if it's a matter of looking at progesterone, which is often going to be associated with things like insomnia or anxiety, depression, so a lot of mood changes, then we're looking at progesterone. Where if it's more hot flashes and night sweats, then we're looking at more estrogen.
Right.
But just, again, trying to understanding where that woman is and then how they need to transition through that period gracefully rather than necessarily so abruptly or sometimes really painfully.
Right. So I know with men, for example, testosterone production naturally declines over time, and a little boost can help with energy and confidence and all kinds of good things. For women, is it only as they're going through menopause that you would recommend HRT?
Not necessarily. So for fertility, you'll often use hormone support. And is quite common, or happens often, where women are still menstruating, but they're often low in things like progesterone. Probably more often than not, it's progesterone than estrogen. Very rarely do I see a woman that's menstruating actually low in estrogen. And I think the biggest reason for that is stress. So progesterone is one of those hormones that can get converted into cortisol, which is a stress hormone, when our body thinks it needs to. So if a woman's undergoing a lot of stress, it may not be that she can't produce progesterone, but she's kind of stealing it all.
Right.
So symptomatically then, they need a little bit of progesterone support, otherwise they're going to have a lot of symptoms.
Makes
so
sense.
It can be at any phase of life. But most classically, you're going to look at it more so in that change of life, kind of that perimenopausal, which could be anywhere in, mid-40s to mid-50s.
Right.
And depending on how long a woman might be on some hormone replacement, depends on what their health issues are, depends on what their overall symptom picture is. So it's individual.
Right. So you do a series of tests, and of course you talk to the patient.
Yeah, absolutely.
See what they're going through.
So blood tests can give you a little bit of information, but I prefer to use urine tests because it actually tells me what your body's doing with those hormones, not just what's circulating in the system. Because we always want to have the best access to what's we call bioavailable or what's usable. So I'll typically use urine tests if I'm trying to understand the big picture, so that I can make sure that whatever therapy I'm using, if I'm using estrogen, for example, I'm using the right form, and I'm being mindful of the symptoms I'm trying to treat, but I'm also not putting them at any form of risk, because estrogen is a growth hormone. So yes, it can be linked to things like breast cancer and endometrial cancer if it's taken in too high of doses.
Right.
So we need to understand what that looks like, and overall what the woman's health picture's been throughout their life. How much estrogen have they had? What's their family history? What's their risk factors? That sort of thing.
Right. Tell us about this beautiful looking book that you wrote here.
Well, it's called The Courageous Cure, and I started the process probably, it's been 2 years ago now. I probably have wanted to write for about 10 years, but always had an excuse why I didn't have time or was too busy to do it. But I finally just kind of decided that for whatever reason, now is the time. I just felt led that that's part of what my path was meant to be. And so really, I wrote the book because a big part of when I'm working with patients, I want them to feel empowered in their healing process and their journey. And I think one of the best ways we can do that is get informed. So I can only say so much in my office.
Right.
So to me, it was also, hey, wouldn't it be great if they had a tool of understanding why we're doing these things and why this is important? So it's meant to be a resource. It's meant to, so there's lots of information in there, but it's also meant to really help people start taking control of their health and their lives and recognizing that they have the power to change it if they choose it.
Right.
So, that's the focus. That's the goal. So, I put lots of different information around the root causes of disease, but also how it is that we can heal.
That's great. I want to ask you a little bit about the process of writing. So I'm a writer too, and I find procrastination is an issue. And I know a lot of writers tell me this. They feel like, well, I've got 200 pages to write, like 2 pages a day is not going to make a difference, and that I've got to shine my shoes, I've got to do my laundry, I've got to wash my car. So we do other things that are also important. We put it off. So how did you deal with that?
Honestly, I had to be incredibly disciplined. I had to protect my time. So I'm working full time, and I have Wednesdays I take off, but I had, at the time, my youngest daughter was 4, so she was still at home. So basically, when she went to school or preschool in the afternoons from about 1 to 3, 4, that was go time for me. There wasn't that, do I have inspiration? It was, this is my time. This is my only allotted time, and so I would sit down and write. And it probably took me almost a year to write it completely. Because that was often the only time I would say, I was inspired by the end. I got to get back to this later. But the reality is it never happened until the following week. So I knew if I scheduled appointments in that time, or if a friend said, hey, let's meet and go here or something, or I had to do something for the office, I would miss an entire week. Right. So I just had to be, nope, I cannot book anything at that time. Otherwise, it never would have happened.
Did you find many times you didn't feel like doing it, but you committed to that 2-hour block? And at the end of the 2 hours, you were kind of pumped up and felt great.
And wanted to keep going.
Yeah.
Often I'd have to okay, listen to some music, kind of get into the mood, maybe read some of what I wrote last time so I could get into the flow of what I wanted to say. And then almost every single time, by the time it was done and I had to go on and to the rest of my day, I was like, no, I need more time. I just want to sit here longer. So that was usually the pattern.
Right. And how about publishing? Is it self-published or did you go with a major publisher?
It's self-published. Being my first book, it was really, really a whole new world for me.
Right.
And I had no idea what I was getting myself into. It's taken me a year, and that's why it's 2 years. It took me a year to write and a year to basically get it to the point where it is as you see in front of you. So
you had to find a printer, you had to find
editors. Charlotte Marshall is an artist in town who did the book cover, from formatting to, I had to get people to, my brother actually was a graphic artist, to do the images in the book, to all the little details around a book that you don't even think about when you read one. To then actually, once I was in the process of, okay, now it's actually becoming a book, it's no longer this Word document, then actually, how do I get it out there? So that was about a 3-month process of just figuring out, how do I get people to be aware that I've written this book, outside of, just my patients, because I really want to help people on a much bigger scale, and I'm only one person.
Right.
So between trying to figure out and understand what social media is, which is a whole world that's new for me, to doing an online launch and a book launch and having people there helping me through that whole process. So it's been a huge learning curve.
Yeah. How can one buy this book today?
So it's available on Amazon, amazon.com
we'll
and
put
.ca.
links to everything.
Yeah, that's great. As well as in my office, right now at Mission Naturopathic Clinic. And I'm looking to get it into some bookstores here in Kelowna as well.
I know Mosaic Books is really good with local authors. I interviewed a book author. That's what she does full-time, is write books. And she said they're really great placing local authors.
So I've connected with them. And so being the Christmas season, it'll probably be the new year before some of those, because they often want you to do book signings and that sort of thing. So yes, I'm looking to get into those in the new year.
That's great. So you started your office in Kelowna, but it's a different location now.
Yes.
Tell us about your current location.
Yeah, so when I first came, like I said, I was working downtown, and then I actually worked at a place called iQuest for 3 years. And many locals who have been here for a while probably are familiar with that name. And then it wasn't able to continue, so I ended up opening up a clinic with Dr. Andrea Chambers and Dr. Audrey Walter in the Mission, at Mission Naturopathic Clinic, just off on Pandosy. And we've been there now for almost 8 years, which is crazy.
So it's pretty close to here.
Yeah.
What are your hours of operation?
Yeah, we're open Monday to Fridays. We all kind of take one rotation day off, so Wednesdays I'm not in, but Mondays to Fridays, and we have a couple nutritionists that work with us and some wonderful staff, and it's a cozy, great little atmosphere, but I really, really appreciate working with such amazing practitioners and doctors. I've been privileged to have such great, powerful, inspirational women in my office, and so it's been a lovely experience.
Nice. So what do you like to do with your days off?
Well, it depends if it's the summer or the winter. If it's the summer, I love hiking. I enjoy golfing if I ever have time. I like to just go to the beach and be outdoors. I think no matter what, in Kelowna, you can always find something to do outside. Yes. In the winter, we love to ski, so we go up as a family, have season passes, and so we enjoy spending, then you're still outside and you're not resenting the cold.
Right. Yeah. It's usually pretty beautiful and sunny up there.
Yes, so it is.
That's great. Would you like to nominate anyone to come on the show in the future?
Yes, I would. I'd actually like to nominate, I'm going to say 2 people. Great. I want to nominate Charlotte Marshall. She's a local artist who has done my book cover, and she's been featured on, she's helped with the Opera Kelowna. She's been, many of you have maybe seen her art at the Art Walk in Lake Country. She's very talented, both artist and photographer. And I'll recommend her husband as well.
Great.
Who actually was a professional tennis player.
What's his name?
Ryan Marshall. And he's now a CFO and has all sorts of ideas and visions, and quite an interesting guy. So
Great.
I think it'd be a lot of fun.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Elena, for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
I really appreciate it. And thank you for the book.
You're most welcome. I hope you enjoy.
Luke Mankus is a realtor. He loves what he does. We asked Luke if he had any regrets about moving here in 2011. And he always says, yeah, one regret. And that is, he didn't move here sooner. When Luke came here, he didn't know anyone. He didn't know the neighborhoods or anything or anyone besides his daughter, who was 6 years old at the time. So he knows what it's like. Now, he's an expert and has helped well over 100 single people, couples, families, and investors with their real estate needs in the Okanagan. If you're new to our beautiful city, Luke can help you get connected with great lawyers, dentists, carpenters, landscapers, swimming pool installers, you name it. And whether you're new to Kelowna or not, Luke knows real estate. He can help you find a great property, negotiate a good deal, and hold your hand all the way through the process until the day you get your shiny new set of keys. Luke is known as a no-pressure kind of guy. He's had clients where it took even a year or more to get them into a property. He just doesn't believe in rushing things. On the other hand, when you decide it's time to act, he's diligent, and he'll work day and night until the job is done. Give Luke Mankus a call or a text message at any time, 778-215-4273. Again, that's 778-215-4273. 778-215-4273 to chat with Luke about real estate.